Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Community Day here. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sonia. I'm the owner and director at VLC, or Virtual Learning Collaborative. I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter. Her name is Anja, and Anja is going to be talking to us about what if she ran an L&D department. She wants to give you her perspective on the outside. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to her. But if you have any questions, you can drop them down over into the Q&A. Anja.
Hello and happy Friday, everyone. Sonia, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure. The tech is with us.
The tech is with us.
Yes, hello, happy Friday, everyone. My name is Anja. That's usually how it's pronounced. Let me just give you a quick recap on my background, so you just have an idea of where I'm coming from. I have a very diverse experience. So I've worked probably in pretty much every major business domain. And in a few different industries. And a few months ago, I was thinking to myself about where I was going to go next with my career. And I actually hired a career coach. And this person looked over my resume, which, as I said, is very diverse. And the challenge for me was, okay, where do I go and how do I position myself in a job market that tends towards specialists versus generalists? And she pointed out to me that pretty much littered through my entire experience is people development, training and people development. And so she said, well, why don't you look into learning and development? And I actually had not really heard of that particular function or that name. And so I started a deep dive into the profession and ended up talking to a lot of people about what it's like to work in L&D and what the challenges are. And it just has been a very interesting experience for me to learn from all of you. So I thought to myself, well, being the champion for business improvement and business process improvement that I am, maybe I will just lay out for this presentation what I think an L&D department might look like if I ran it. So take what I say with a grain of salt. It's not meant to accuse anyone of wrongdoing, but I just want to give you some ideas of if you are in the position of possibly leading a department right now, or you're on the track to, what things you might want to think about. I think the biggest thing to think about with L&D, as it is with any department, and I come from a startup background, so I have built functions and organizations from scratch, is what is the role of L&D in the organization? So looking at your organization's strategic plan, hopefully it has one, and organizational goals, long-term, medium-term, short-term, how does L&D fit in that? And I think this is the most crucial step to take to really position yourself well. And I think a lot of this will come from intense talks with your organization's leadership and developing your department's purpose, and dare I say it should be a compelling purpose, together, because you want to have that executive buy-in. Ideally, you have an executive champion or more who stands behind you as a department, or department head, and understands what you need and how your department functions within the larger organization. When you have that dialed down, it's much easier to determine what your departmental goals are going to be. I just want to go back really quickly to this point about compelling purpose. So when I read L&D missions, and I'm kind of putting this in quotation marks, I see a lot of, we want to train, or we are training the organizations to advance their development and the organizational goals, or something like that. And sometimes that comes off as rather generic. So a compelling purpose is really a purpose that not just ties your department back to the organization and its goals, but also gives a very brief but poignant description of how you would do that. So this is sort of the very all these things that I just mentioned are the very foundational pieces that need to be put in place. And I think this is something that not only you as the leader, but everyone in your department needs to be able to recite in their sleep. You really want to have that pat down, and everyone needs to be on the same page about that. The second key thing, I think, is to identify key partners in your organization that you can connect and work with, particularly not just when it comes to determining training needs, but also when it comes to assessing the success of the programs that you offer. So measuring things, I'm big on data, measuring things is just extremely important. So having access to data and to people who are either very good at data or people who can at least give you access to the data that you need. Going back to the point about executive buy-in and executive championing, this is the thing that will help you advocate for the department and position the department not as a cost center, but as an investment. So I've heard a lot of people talk about this issue of, we are struggling to get our budgets approved. We're struggling to get buy-in for the different projects that we want to do, or the investments that we want to make into those projects. When you are partnering with other departments or divisions in your organization, and you can exchange all the pieces of information necessary to develop programs that are very likely to actually achieve the goals of those programs, that will really go a long way toward showing your value, and so you don't end up in this reactive defensive position. I see this in human resources also, but I think there's been a little bit more time to recognize that human resources is actually a strategic function and investment in the organization versus a cost center. Let's talk about L&D leadership. L&D leadership is, of course, extremely crucial. And my experience generally has been that leaders need to actually spend a fair amount of their time leading and managing. So it's great to have people who are technically skilled as leaders, but that's really not their main purpose. Their main purpose is to lead the department, to develop the people within the department, to champion the department within the organization. So some things that I think about here are that the people skills of the managers and the leaders in the L&D function are more important than the technical skills. So I just see no way around that. I have had experience with people who are extremely skilled technically, but their soft skills are just very lacking, and that has a huge impact on the environment and the tone within the department. So as a leader, it's pretty much your job to develop the department's value proposition and purpose with the leadership in your organization, and to tie once you've identified resources, needs to those things, to the value proposition and purpose. You should be choosing and tracking the necessary metrics to meet your organizational goals. And if you are not necessarily skilled in data analytics yourself as a leader, and I'm going to talk about this in the talent section, have a person on your team who understands data very well. I kind of feel like I'm making a pitch for myself here, but be that as it may. Also, as a leader, you are needing to market the hell out of your department and your successes in particular. This needs to be spread around the organization, and it will impact, hopefully, how people approach you when they have training needs. You need to focus on the results when you are marketing those successes and when you're talking to leaders about your value, not the costs. So again, positioning things as an investment versus costs. Another thing that I think is really important for leaders to establish, and you certainly should be doing that together with your team, is the department's process. And you can certainly outline it in very broad terms, but try to be as specific as possible, as you need to be, so that your team knows what to do, that new people coming into the department aren't completely lost, and that you also can communicate how you're going to execute your projects to the people outside of your department. I think the next point is probably the most critical in my view after the work you're doing to champion your department, and that's to build your people. This is where the soft skills come into play. It's not just about skill development. I think that's honestly the easiest part. I think the more difficult parts are to develop the soft skills of your people in order to collaborate well together. And so that's the communication skills, that's working together as a team skills, that's grit and resilience, because that's basically what everybody needs, right? And a key part of that is something that Toddy actually talked about earlier, and that is providing regular and detailed feedback to your people so they know when they're on the right track, so they know what it is that they're doing that's providing value to the department and to individuals, to your teammates within the department. One of the things that I noticed in my managing roles is becoming pretty jealous of your people's time. You want as much as possible to have your people focus on the things that they're really good at and that provides the most value to the projects and to the work of the department. So I would have executive leadership talk to me about, oh, can we do this? And can we do that? And, can we fly around the moon 3 times and back? And I would be having to talk about, well, here are our priorities as a department, and here's what it would take to do what you're asking, and then manage the expectations and manage the scope of the things that we're asked to do. So it doesn't help anybody when people are stretched to the max. The quality of your work suffers, of course, and also the results that you produce, and that has a huge impact on how you're perceived within the organizations and within the organization. Let's talk about talent. Talent is a challenging thing, in part because as a leader, you need to have the ability to recognize talent and to make good decisions about hiring and where to put people within the department and what skill sets you want to be looking for and need to fill. I think that every hire needs to be strategic to achieving the department's goals. So it's not enough to go to your human resources business partner, to your recruiters and say, we need an instructional designer, and then maybe roughly outline the responsibilities for the role and the skill set. I think you want to be much more involved than that. I just hear a lot of people complain that they can't get good talent, and maybe this is not so much true in the L&D space, but other places, and I just have to shake my head at that because I see very talented people all the time looking for jobs, and they're just not noticed. So I don't think the problem is necessarily that there isn't enough talent, although there are certainly spaces where that may be the case. Data science might be one of those. It is the approach you take to recruiting and hiring that is often the thing that needs to be addressed properly. I'm also not a huge fan of focusing on skills entirely. I think that talent needs to be looked at in terms of potential. Past performance is important, but it is not necessarily, some might say it might be predictive of future performance, but I think it's much less so than people think. Because things change for a person, and what they were able to do when they were 20 and didn't have any attachments, kids, etc. It can be quite different from what they're able to do, how much hours they can put in, and so on and so forth when they have a family. But the potential piece is something that that is really important to recognize. And it's not always the thing that you can glean from a resume. That's really something that you need to address. You need to assess, and when you're actually talking to a person who was applied for your job. So that does tend to maybe make the hiring process a little bit more lengthy, a little bit more involved, even on your part as the hiring manager, but it will really pay off in the long run. Having people who are not just skilled in the things that you need them to do, but who have the potential to excel and acquire new skills as needed or as they're interested in, who are adaptive and nimble, I think is something that will set your department up for successful growth in the future. The other piece is the mentorship or skill development piece. So skill development and mentorship. It's not necessarily something that the leader always has to do, but your people within the department hopefully will be open and able to help new talent coming into the department get up to speed on the organization, on the process within your department, and on the projects, as well as working together with the other people on the team. And I really like this idea of buddying up, especially in the first few months. So you have someone who's more experienced or has been has been longer in the department, shepherding a new person. The onboarding process in and of itself should be very structured, of course, but there are always things that kind of come up that maybe are new. And so this buddying up system kind of helps fill those potential holes that might appear, so that the person who's new doesn't feel like they're left in the wind, so to speak. Mentorship and development of other people is also an important soft skill for your team members to develop, I think. Yes, I think it depends on a person's traits. Some people are just more interested in doing that. And that's okay. Just, I think it's important to have people on your team who are also willing and able to do that piece. And I think to encourage this, incentives are extremely important. So make these things part of a performance evaluation, part of merit increases. Make it part of the assessment of your team on a regular basis. I see many organizations do the performance review dance once a year. That's not enough. It needs to be more frequent. Things change so quickly for people, not just within their personal lives, but within the organization, especially if you're working within the fast-paced environment. And you can't wait a year to determine whether someone is able and has the resources needed and is growing in the job that you hired them for. It's hard to make a specific recommendation for this, but, quarterly, I think it's pretty good. And it doesn't need to be as involved as the yearly process, or it could just be that you're just doing it quarterly. So you'd never need to do this big bang production of performance reviews at the end of the year. So let me backtrack in my mind. The performance evaluation always sounds so official. It doesn't need to be so super official. I mean, you want it to be structured. You want to use some form of assessment, of course. And you want to make sure that it's consistent across the board. So consistent in terms of the assessment that you use, the skills that you're evaluating, and the process that you're using, etc. But it needs to be flexible enough to accommodate for individual differences. So part of that performance piece is also always looking at, do your people have everything that they need to do their job well? And some of those things, of course, are within your control within the department, but other things are not necessarily within your control or not entirely within your control. And that ties back to the role of L&D in the organization. When you have that executive buy-in and that executive championing, it's going to be a lot easier to address those resource needs. So this is pretty much an overview of how I would think if I was to be given the task of developing an L&D department, or if I was put in a leadership position. I do want to answer your questions or get your feedback we kind of notice that we're not really able to pull people in so much to actually talk, but do use the chat feature, and hopefully we can get a little bit of a conversation going. If you are a leader or scheduled to become a leader, give me a smiley face, because I want to know how many of you are actually in this position. And ooh, I saw a few floating by. And give me a check mark. Can we do check marks? Let me look at the. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you are working with an L&D and you think your leader is doing a really good job. Oh, this is good to see. That makes me feel good. All right, so let me go into the chat here. And Sonia, you can jump in to see what questions you have.
Sure, and the little smiley or in the box to send a message to the left of where you type is a little smiley face, and you can click that and then find in there little icons that you could use there. And it looks like I think we can have other folks chat, can't we, or talk on the line? Yes, there you go. Molly's got it. Is your leader doing a good job right now? Raise hands isn't working.
Oh, well, that is not good. Oh, no. So we see Toddy raised her hand.
There is an option over in the far right up at the top of the chat that says raised hand Q&A. There is a question or more of a statement from Danny or Ortegan, and he said more of a statement. Anja is spot on with her ideas as an experienced L&D consultant. I continually see the focus more on tools, platforms, and skills, and much less on the learning challenge that teams are supposed to address. And let's see, we do have some raised hands here. So let me see if I can get, I can't do anything to let those folks talk. So that's Rebecca. If you can do that, Luis or Molly, if you can give Toddy or Rebecca the rights to speak, that would be wonderful.
Oh, there we go.
Hi, Toddy. You are on.
Oh, okay. Excellent. There we go. Yay. All right. Cool. Excellent. Yeah, I wanted to say I think you're spot on. I was in a weird position. I came in as a second in command for a department as like the assistant department manager for most of 2018, and this. I don't know, I think I'd been there a month when my manager ended up going out on a medical leave that put her out for 7 months. And so one of the challenges that I had being in that lower level rung was not having the insight into the feedback that should have been coming to me or somebody like from the director level. And so I feel like the way that it was structured was problematic, and there wasn't enough transparency there. So one of the things I feel like needs to happen is there needs to be better transparency, I think, from the messaging from, because we had an organization where literally the company CEO was extremely involved in what we did. And that feedback that we would get was always a backlash. Like, oh, wow, you just assigned this learning to 150 people who shouldn't have been assigned this learning. And we'd always find out about it retroactively rather than understanding what it was that she didn't want to happen. And so that just about drove me nuts because, had somebody just said to me, hey, you know what, at the top level, they don't want these folks to be assigned this, rote learning anymore. We could have really headed off a lot of the issues, I think, at the pass. And so that level of transparency is one of the things I think is a big issue with most L&D departments is because, they're almost always HR, or they're somewhere close to HR, right, or dotted line at least. They're always high visibility because they are HR, and yet you don't feel like you have that transparency about what the organization really wants. And that's one of the things I think needs to be at least maybe baked in somehow. And I don't know how that happens, whether that becomes, we actually had a chartered group that helped us structure what we did within our group and like what our intakes looked like. So it was essentially a committee that worked with us to help us determine which projects we would take on during the year, and that was super useful. Many times I've told people if I could do an organization the way they did it, where we had that advisory committee to say, okay, we want you to triage things and take the top 1/3 or the top, 40% of the projects that, get stack ranked against others. That was super helpful to us, because then we didn't have to go back to the stakeholders and say, okay, sorry, we don't have time, we don't have the resources, but we could say, all right, you fall into this category as far as how we stack ranked you. And, according to our advisory group, this is what we should be taking on. But we didn't have that relationship with the really higher ups. We just had it with our committee groups. And that just was like, it's ran around, scratching my head all the time saying, no, why don't we have this kind of relationship with the top level where they're giving us better guidance? So,
yeah,
it's really interesting though.
I see that problem all the time. And, there are two things that I think will help, although this is a long road if you're coming into a place and where everything is kind of lacking, let's put it that way. One is that when you are hired for a leadership position in an organization, throughout that process, I think you need to be able to assess what you need to get a good grasp of what the main problems are. And if you feel like in that hiring process, the people who are hiring you, the executive leadership isn't forthcoming enough, that might be a big red flag that you will struggle when you actually take on the job.
Yeah, and I think I had some of that insight even when I interviewed. But I went ahead and took the job anyway. And, I really enjoyed the job. I had, a really nice team. We accomplished a lot. And I have to say, prior to going on medical leave, my manager had done amazing things. She had taken a very poorly run organization and transformed it by putting in place a lot of processes. And she had her own team go through and document the processes, and then our advisory committees would actually audit them for us, which is really cool because, they basically kind of gave it a gut check to say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Or, that part of your process is broken because just frankly, the managers are not going to have time to peer review everything for you, that kind of thing. But, it was such a dichotomy because we had so many pieces that worked so well and were improving so much. And then to have this like top level executive almost level that basically, it's like you felt like every time you turn around, you're going to get kicked across the room because you've done something wrong by mistake. Most of our customers, our core competency groups that were building competencies loved us, but on the executive level, we just couldn't do anything right. So it was interesting. It's like I've thought about it, whether I would want to go back to that or not. I don't know. It was a learning experience for sure.
So I think Stacy raised her hand.
Yep, cool.
Louise, can you promote Stacy and demote Toddy? Sorry, Toddy.
No worries. I'm used to that.
Good to see your face.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah, the transparency piece. Oh, Stacy was just testing. Well,
I think she has a question now. I think she has a question.
I wonder if you need to raise your hand again so we can get you in. Oh, okay, you're posting. So while you're posting, I will just say one thing about the transparency thing. This is very common, obviously, in organizations, and especially in organizations that kind of have more this top-down structure, and it can become a real problem. When I was in a position where I was kind of seeing that happening, and that it wasn't a malintent, it wasn't malintentioned. It was just that's the way my executives were operating. I, took a good amount of time and took also several repetitions of making the point that if I don't know what's going on and you come to me with wanting something, it's going to be a lot harder for me to help you. And so over time, they became more open, and we had less of the situation of them talking behind doors and then saying, hey, Anja, can you do this? Can your team accomplish this in, 5 seconds? So it does take time to kind of change that from a cultural perspective. And it can be hard when you're not a patient person like me. Stacy.
I made it. I did post down in chat, but now that I'm here and live, I just was wondering if I hired someone that turned out not to be a good fit, or if our team did, and they just weren't up to the task, but I believe they had the potential. What would be some steps I could take to get them up to speed, to make them successful? And my second part is, do you think that it would work the same for employees and contractors, that I could treat that the same way?
So you think they have the potential?
I do. Well, let's say I saw something there when I first met with them, or, I do feel it was the potential. Maybe I don't know if they're overwhelmed, or I just don't know it. So I do believe the potential is there. I'm just not sure how to best implement making it all come together.
That's a challenging situation. One thing I learned the hard way over the many years is that you need to have a heart-to-heart in situations like this with the person, and to figure out what's really going on. We tend to kind of get caught in our own heads about our assumptions, what might be going on, but we really don't know. And that's not always a comfortable conversation to have with someone. And it might feel threatening, but you want to position it in such a way. Look, I want you to be able to make the most out of this job, get everything that you can. I'm seeing some of these things. What do you think? And what are your thoughts about what you need to make this work better for you? The potential question is always one of those. Someone might have the potential, but if for some reason they don't have enough of the interest or passion. So for instance, I'm really good at several things, but that doesn't mean that I really want to do those all the time, or that I really want to do them professionally, for that matter. And sometimes it takes people to kind of do the job to realize that. So when you go into that conversation, you might have to really be prepared that you're uncovering things that will, lead to, well, this is probably not the best arrangement. I think that goes for contractors as well, though. I mean, just because someone is not a W-2 employee doesn't mean they don't have the same needs, and when it comes to doing their job well and thriving in the job that they do. It might seem easier to get rid of a contractor than an employee, but ultimately you always have to think from the long-term perspective of how not doing this well reflects on the organization and reflects on possibly getting new talent into the organization. So I think it's a tough situation, but it's also a situation that if you let it fester, tends to become worse. And you also don't want it to affect other people in your department, where they're seeing things where they're like, why is she not fixing this?
Well, and I think I sometimes take that for granted, that somebody, exactly like what you said, somebody might be good at something or has the potential to be amazing at it, but it just might not be something that they want to do or love. So that would be a problem. So
yeah,
that was helpful. I mean, I knew it was a hard question because who can really answer that and, make it fit in all situations, but that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do want to say that with these types of things, it's good to do a postmortem to figure out, okay, how did we get into this? But also be realistic. Hires aren't always going to work out. That isn't necessarily your fault. If it happens a lot, then we need to sit down and figure out, okay, what in the hiring process is not ideal that these situations keep arising.
Great point. Thank you very much. And I'm loving this platform, but I'm loving seeing the hearts, I'm seeing the love and the applause. It's awesome. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hey, Molly, if you want to, I saw your note. I learned how not to treat a team. That's such an interesting point. Can you elaborate on that? And by the way, I have made many mistakes myself, and I had to fess up to them and stand in front of my team or in front of my team members and say, you know what? I didn't handle this well. But I had good mentors who told me, when you mess up, you fess up, because you don't want to damage the trust that is developing within your team. It's a very fragile currency. I don't know if Molly's still there, but someone raised their hands. Oh, yeah. Molly, can we let Molly in? And we have about 4 minutes left.
And Luis, are you able to promote Molly? Or Molly, are you able to promote yourself?
We're still trying to figure that part out.
I totally agree with you, Stacy. Some of our best learning experiences come from how not to do things.
Yeah, Luis might be somewhere else.
Let's see, does someone else have a hand raised? Molly does, but I cannot promote her.
Oh, goodness. I see what you're saying. Yeah, when someone is a bully, that is terrible. I actually have a similar situation with someone who at my work is being bullied by someone she's working with, and the toll it takes, not just on the workplace, but on this person in particular, is just massive. And it's such a long-lasting effect. As organizational leaders, I personally think there needs to be a zero tolerance policy. And a lot of these people just keep being dragged along. Things just keep getting pushed down, especially if this person is in a leadership position or they're a high performer. So that the ripple effects are just so strong that it doesn't matter that your person brings in $10 million a year. The cost on the organization of bullying is way greater. So I'm just on my soapbox. That to me is a zero tolerance issue. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, they can scar you for pretty much for life. And you become also very unsure, or what's the word, suspicious, even when you're interviewing, because you're thinking to yourself, okay, this person sounds nice right now, but what are they going to be like when I actually take this job? It's very detrimental. It's also something where I think you really would benefit from seeing a therapist. I mean, I'm a strong advocate of therapy in general, not just when you're dealing with depression or whatever, but also to develop your personal awareness of yourself, your thought processes and how you react, your tendencies and such. It can really help you grow as a person. So I kind of see it as a self-growth tool more so than a medical treatment. Yeah, Judy said it's traumatizing. Yeah, PTSD is a thing, and workplace bullying is definitely one reason why people are experiencing PTSD. Okay, so I think, we need to close out because there are also other sessions going on, and I don't want to keep you too much. I do want to say thank you so much to Louise, and sorry, I have a hard time with pronouncing names sometimes, and Sonia, and do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and strike up a conversation. I'm very open.
There we go. Thanks everybody for attending. It was wonderful to have you here with us. Anja, you did a fantastic job. I really enjoyed the conversation and the key points that you made here.
No, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys having me and listening to me. My kids don't, so this is a welcome change.
It's good to have someone who does.